Today's agenda is going to cover some photography basics. A lot of taking a good picture has very little to do with the actual camera you use. It has to do with your ability to understand how some things work with photography. And we'll talk about some of those basic principles that anybody can understand, anybody can learn, and that will help you think about your photos as you take them. But then we are going to take a look at the iPhone camera app, and we're going to take a look at the iPhone camera settings, some things that might help you out if you're interested in improving your photos. So the basics of photography have to do with the fact that there are three things that you really can deal with. They have to do with light, they have to do with composition, and they have to do with steadiness, meaning holding the camera as still as possible and avoiding vibration. If you know these three things and have a little better understanding of these three things, you will learn your photos will improve a lot and become a lot better over time without any difficulty at all, regardless of your skill at taking photography and what camera you use. So let's talk about light a little bit. Light is what your camera captures. We rely on light to see everything. And light has many dimensions. It has color, it has intensity, it has direction. And so these are factors that are important. The science and photography is the ability to capture things with light. And so you need light to have a photo. So obviously, if you need light to have a photo, one of the more difficult situations to take a photo in are low light or dark or nighttime situations. And there are some challenges with that we'll talk about when you have a very low light that becomes an issue. But your cameras on your phone try and compensate for the light, whatever your situation is. But your camera is capturing light that reflects off of the objects that you are trying to take a picture of. And so understanding that the more light you have, probably the more options you have to get a better picture, and the kind of light you have can change your photo in terms of what you do are things to understand. That most professional photographers learn a lot about light first before they really worry about other things with their photos. Now, the amount of light you has a lot to do with it. The more light you have, what's called a faster shutter speed. And in our phones and in our other cameras, there are two things. There's the diameter of the lens that allows light in, and then there's how fast the shutter clicks in order to capture the picture at that moment. And the faster the speed of the shutter, the sharper the image you will have because you have more light. So having more light is always helpful to be able to get a sharper, clearer picture whenever possible. So the amount of light makes a difference. So a lot of people, use situations where they add light. A lot of photographers do things where they bring extra light in. If you ever see a professional photo shoot, you'll see that they bring a lot of lighting in to add light to whatever situation there is. There are, people that bring in reflector screens to reflect light, but understanding that having a lot of light. So there are some times of the day, though, that there's too much light and it creates very washed out images, and that's in the middle of the day. There's something called the golden hour or the golden hours in lighting with photography, and it's when the light first comes up in the morning, it's at an angle, and it's softer and it isn't as harsh on creating contrast with objects that you want to take pictures of, and at the end of the day. So most professional photographers don't meet their families for breakfasts or dinners because that's the best time of day to do photography when you're outside. If you're inside, having more light helps a lot. So you want to turn on as many lights as you can in a room to create as much light and avoid shadows. If you have light coming, we'll talk a little bit about direction, because the direction that light comes from affects your photo as well. And you'll see some examples. I have a still life apple and a bottle of wine sitting next to me that we're going to use to try and take some pictures of to see what different photos look like. The subject at where it's located in the direction has a lot to do with it. How light hits your subject and the direction it's coming from has an effect on things like shadows. You can see these vases here. They have shadows on them. And so if you have a very directional light that's coming from a specific direction, that will create something. If you have light coming from behind what you're trying to take a picture of, your camera is trying to figure out the right exposure, and it's trying to balance everything in the picture. Smartphones usually create what's called a balanced exposure, so that if you have a bright spot and a really dark spot, it's trying to develop the best compromise to make sure that they're both exposed the best possible way. And there are some things you can do in your camera with just a simple tap of your finger to tell it where you want it to focus and where you want it to set the exposure that will help you in lighting situations where you might not have the best possible light. So if you have light behind somebody, if you're facing the sun or you're facing a window, those are not the best situations to be in. What you can do, if it's possible, is you can ask people to let you go around to the other side, so the sun is at your back or at an angle. Or if you have a window that's letting light in, you can have your back to the window. Always try and have your back to the light or to the side of you if possible, and that will help you avoid washed out, high contrast photos. And that's something we don't think about, but it's something where, if you're in a situation, oh, okay, I should have the light in back of me or to the side of me, that'll create a better picture. So you've got these things with light direction, and let's see if I can get this slide working here. I don't know if I can change this or not. No, it doesn't seem like it's going to let me do it during presenter mode. You've got a camera, you've got a subject here. So typically, if you have light coming from the top or from the same side as the camera is pointing at the object, but you might have light coming from the bottom. You might have light coming from the back, the top, or from the side, or from other places. So you've got this thing about where is the light direction. Most photographers will they'll look at what direction is my light coming from first before they snap a photo. Now, you don't always have that option. Try and get the light behind you, or at least to the side of you a little bit. In studio situations and professional photography, people use multiple lights, so that they have a light that's shining maybe directly at them or the subject, and then they have a light at an angle that's coming from an angle to create a little bit of shadow and depth and dimension. Shadows help create dimension with 3D objects, so they're really helpful that way. Okay. Composition. We don't think about composition too much, but composition, how an image is composed and where the subject is, can really make the difference. We think that centering is the best thing, but oddly enough, it's not. Psychologically, the Greeks knew this when they designed the Parthenon. And so it's something that goes way, way back, is that our eyes and our perception tend to like things in a particular location as opposed to the center. When things are centered, they don't look as interesting all the time. And there's a simple rule for composition that you can remember very easily, and your phone has a setting that will help you out. It's called the rule of thirds. If you divide your photo into thirds, your screen that you want to take a picture with, the intersection of the lines creates 4 spots. Having a point of interest in one of those spots tends to make photos more interesting to people. They tend to look at them longer. They tend to find them more interesting. They tend to find the subject appears better when you have it a little bit off center and in one of these third locations. So fortunately for us, smartphone settings allow you to apply a grid to your camera that you can use to use the rule of thirds anytime you want to. There's a lot of other composition, but this is one of the simplest ones, and I didn't want to make it any more complicated than this. Another aspect of composition is your camera angle. We tend, because we are human beings, we tend to take most of our pictures when we are standing up, and we tend to take them from our eye level. But, for example, if you were taking a picture of a dog or a cat that tends to be lower to the ground, and you take it from eye level, you're going to be pointing down with your camera. Sometimes getting down low or up high changes the perspective of the composition so that you can see things from a dog's point of view or from another angle point of view or from another aspect. There are photographers that get on ladders, but there are things. I was in Paris at the Eiffel Tower, and it was a great perspective to take pictures of the Seine River because it was a really dramatic downward angle with all the lights that just really worked dramatically. It was fantastic. So sometimes changing your point of view can help you with your composition as well. And you don't know necessarily what's going to look the best until you look at the pictures after you take them. So if you have a chance, try a couple of different points, angles, and see, and then you can evaluate. The storage space for photos sometimes has you requiring to add cloud storage, but it's relatively inexpensive, and taking a lot of photos and choosing the best ones from what you take is a standard professional way of taking photos. Most photographers don't wait for the perfect photo. They're taking hundreds, if not thousands, of photos all the time. They're looking for the right light, but when everything is set, they're just snapping pictures off in a large quantity to try and take as many as they can, and then they go and pick the ones that they want later on. And you can do that too if you take more photos. And attaching somebody with doing something, you might not know what they are, where they are, or what they're doing. You might catch somebody in the act of doing something that you might not have otherwise did it if you were snapping off pictures on a more regular basis. So the other last thing that I want to mention is holding the camera steady is one of the best things you can do. 2 hands really helps a lot. So you can see different people at different angles here. They have their camera that they're holding in different ways. Finding a support, somebody's leaning against the door of their car. If you're taking pictures from a car, by the way, try and roll the windows down because that glass is going to create a challenge with your quality of your image. You don't always have a choice, but it's going to work a lot better if you don't have to take the photo through a glass. And then if you have an opportunity, a tripod works really well to hold things steady if you have that opportunity. See, a lot of people don't think about taking a tripod, but they do. Now, the advantage of having a lot of light is that your camera can take a picture with a fast shutter speed, meaning it's a fraction of a second. And one of the things that having a fast shutter speed does is it captures things really fast so they don't have a chance to move. The less light you have, the longer your camera needs to stay open to capture that light, to capture the image, which means you might end up introducing some vibration or shakiness into your image because the lens has to stay open to let enough light in. And in that case, Your camera tries to compensate with some stability tools, but if you can hold it steady, you can take a long, a fairly long exposure picture, even in low light, and have it come out. So composition, understanding where your light is, holding the camera steady are three of the most important things you can do. In addition to understanding, some things that might help you with your camera. And the features on the camera are really great. I mean, our smartphones take really good pictures without a lot of work on our part. They're autofocus, they auto expose, which means they adjust for the right lighting. But you can use zoom in and out. You can use grids to control your composition, and you also have access to some manual controls and other settings as new things get introduced into cameras all the time, because the camera is one of the biggest reasons people have a smartphone and one of the things they use most often. And we'll take a look at these features and how they work and what we can use them for. So you should be seeing my iPhone screen now. And there is a camera icon. This is the standard one that comes with your iPhone, and your iPhone has lenses on the back. This is an iPhone 15 Pro, but not the Plus. So it doesn't have the bigger screen, but it has three cameras. It has a standard camera, it has a wide angle camera, and it has a telephoto camera. So those are all built into the device. When you upgrade your devices, when you upgrade in Samsung, when you upgrade in iPhones, you'll typically get additional lenses that are able to give you more adaptability in taking photos in different situations. And that's one of the capabilities of phones. So I'm going to launch my camera app here, and we'll take a look at here. So what I've got a screen here that's going. I've got a bottle of wine and an apple sitting over here. I've got a window that's closed behind it. I can take my two fingers and pinch and spread them on the screen of the camera to zoom in and out. And I have a grid system set up, and I actually have a little level. You can see that little level in the center that goes left and right as I twist it. And that tells me when I'm holding my camera level. And I also have this grid system that lets me position things based on the rule of thirds. I'm going to show you in settings how to get that. So if I just tap the shutter, it takes a picture, and then I can see the picture when I go to my camera roll. Okay, nothing fancy. Let the auto exposure, autofocus do everything for me. So the first thing I want to show you is in your settings for your camera. If you go into your settings and you can scroll down, and eventually you'll find camera, or you can search for camera. Camera has a couple of settings, okay? Your camera on your phone is both a still camera and a video camera. We're not going to talk about recording video so much today. We're going to talk about using the still camera. And there is a setting for composition called grid, and it's normally turned off. So if I turn off the grid and I go back to the camera, you'll see there's no grid on my screen. But if I go back to the grid and turn it on, you'll see on the camera that I've got a grid system set up based on a rule of thirds. And it also works if you turn it, horizontal or vertical. It doesn't matter which way you're orienting your camera. Okay, so that's one of the things that is helpful in settings. I also turned on level. Lots of times I will be walking and I'll take a picture while I'm walking, and I'll be on a road or a path, and I'll be on a hill. And so I'm not standing level. Now, the great thing about iPhones and Android phones is you can adjust the level of a picture after you take it, but it might cut a few things out of the corner that you might want to do that. So you have to be careful. Mirror front camera gives you the ability to see what your front camera is taking a picture of, the way it looks. And then viewing outside the frame gives you the ability to see a little bit outside the frame of your picture. So if there's something missing, you can adjust your zoom or angle to do that. So you have the ability in these settings. Grid is one of the best ones to turn on. The others are all pretty standard setup, but I've set up grid and level so that they work for me. And both Android and iPhones let you do that. And that'll help you compose your pictures a little bit better when you take them, because you're taking advantage of the rule of thirds there. So any questions about settings with your iPhone that you can adjust? Let me go back to the camera here, and I'm going to point it at my still life here, and I'm going to pinch in to zoom. And I have a couple of things that I can do here. I have a situation where there's not a lot of light in back, but I can, reposition things to make them a little more interesting if I want to. Sometimes just practicing with photos is one of the best things you can do. So if I want to take a photo here, I can snap it and it's going to take a good photo. If I want to zoom out, zooming out is okay, because then you can crop a picture when you edit it to make it work. But let's say I wanted to make sure that I was focused on the apple. Autofocus is pretty good, but let's say I wanted to make sure I was focused on the apple and I was setting my exposure for the apple. If I tap the screen, you'll see a little orange box open up that sets the exposure and the focus at that point, so that in some situations you may have an object behind another object that you want to take, and that's the one you want to be in focus, particularly with people. And your phone camera will automatically do facial recognition, and if the faces are all pretty level, it works really well to take the picture. But if there's people that are in back or in front, so sometimes your camera might want to focus on somebody in front, or it might want to focus on somebody to the side, and you really want to focus on somebody in back, in a situation like that. So by tapping, you can set your exposure, and it sets exposure and focus. Now, if you tap and hold on it, it locks it in place so that wherever you point your camera, that area is going to be locked in place and will let you take exposure like that. Now, I'm going to take one more picture, and I'm going to put my camera down here, and I'm going to do something. I'm going to open up the backlight. I have a set of blinds here that's going to open up a lot of light. So I'm going to open up the light, and that's going to create a backlight situation for here. Okay, so let me get this focused right and see if I can get it set up. Hold on a second, and we will get it working. Okay, it affects my exposure with my zoom as well, but you can see that with this light here now, I have a lot of light in back, and you can see how dark the apple and the bottle of wine turn out. So by tapping on the bottle of wine and the apple, I can get better exposure for them and make it so that the exposure is pretty good. Now, it's a real distracting background. That's one of the other things about composition to be aware of, is backgrounds can be very distracting and they can be very effective. But if I go back to changing this light so that there's not this strong light in back of the subject, we'll see what they look like when we look at the camera here for a second. Okay, so now I've just got artificial light, and it creates a little bit of a dimension here that I can manage a little bit better. However, there are some options for me to work with the camera on this phone. If the bottom of the camera, let me get my annotation going here. At the bottom of the camera, you can see that there's these notes here. We are in photo mode. There's also a video, a cinematic video, a portrait, and a panorama. Okay, so with photo, it's going to take a photo with a standard setting without any real modifications. It's going to try and do autofocus unless I set it up so that I tap and force focus in a particular area. If I take my finger and I slide over to portrait mode, I have changed my camera's functionality a little bit. So I'm going to zoom in here a little bit, see what I can do. And I have something called natural light. Okay, you can see the apple's a little more out of focus, so I want to tap on that to get it back in focus. And it gives me a couple of options here. I can go to something called studio light. Okay, and it doesn't really look like much here, but what it's going to do is it's going to focus on a particular area here. If I tap it with studio light, the photo is going to look very different than what I normally would take. So I have the ability to adjust these things. So let me make sure studio light is working here. And there should be a location here for it. Let me move these a little bit closer if I need to. Sometimes you have to be a little closer to them in the subject. And studio lighting, sometimes it will highlight certain areas of it for you. So I've got a studio light that I took earlier here when I had more option. You can see the studio light, it creates a kind of a highlight effect where light is coming in from a particular area. It's great for portrait shots, not so much for still lifes or subjects, that you might want to utilize, but it's great for portrait shots. Another option is contour that kind of adjusts the exposure for the edges. You can see the background is kind of blurred. The window shades are not sharp. They're not in focus. They're actually blurred. So if I take a picture of that, you can see they're blurred now instead of being in focus. And so you have a couple of options here. And so these are different options in portrait mode that you can experiment with and try them out. Oh, the stage lighting, that's the one I wanted to do. Okay, so I'm going to try the stage lighting here and take that picture. And that creates that highlight effect where it really focuses in on a subject very tightly. And it's great for portraits. Then you've got a stage light mono. So if you want to focus in on, and it'll give you a really interesting effect by doing a couple of different things here. So these are all different features that are built into your camera that give you the ability to adjust things. And by zooming in and out, you can adjust where the highlighting is. These are portraits. They're really, really good for situations with facial shots, not so much for still life, but you can utilize them for still lifes as well. All right. Thanks, everybody.